The desert winds of VoSEK howled outside, shaking the walls of the Craw outpost. Derek Kane crouched low in the shadows, scanning the dimly lit structure. The mission had been clear: sabotage the Craw's mining equipment, disrupt their slave trade operations, and get out. Simple. But the Craw were far more prepared than he'd anticipated. He'd infiltrated their compound with ease, cutting down 2 sentries before slipping inside. But his luck had run out quickly. The corridor had been a trap. He never saw the full force of them until it was too late. 6 of them. Craw warriors, each over 7 feet tall, their dark exoskeletons glistening under the light of their ship's torches. They had circled him, their eyes glowing with hunger and contempt. The sounds of his rifle firing echoed through the narrow passage before the power cell ran dry. Kane had never been captured. Not in all his years of covert missions. But tonight, his body was a canvas of bruises and cuts, his senses dull from the blows. His arms were bound tightly to the cold metal wall of a Craw prison ship. The pain in his chest was sharp, each breath a laborious effort. He was alive, but barely. A door slid open. Footsteps echoed. Kane lifted his head, blood running down his face. A Craw, its armor clinking as it entered, leaned down. Its mandibles clicked in irritation. "You are a problem," it hissed in broken, guttural human speech. Kane's vision blurred, but he held its gaze. It was a mistake, this hesitation. He should have been dead by now, his mind should have surrendered to the pain, but instead, he focused on the single thought that kept him breathing: escape. The Craw grabbed him by the collar, hoisting him against the wall. Kane's teeth clenched, every muscle protesting, but he said nothing. "Not so tough now, are you?" the Craw sneered. It leaned closer, close enough that Kane could smell the acrid musk of its thick exoskeleton. But he wasn't afraid. Fear had no place in his mind. In fact, his lip curled, a smirk foaming. "Keep talking," he rasped, blood seeping through his teeth. "Eventually, I'll hear something worth hearing." The alien stepped back, visibly startled by his defiance. The door slid open again. A towering figure entered, Icras. Kane's instincts flared. The Craw commander was a beast of a creature, a cruel embodiment of everything his people had come to hate. The scars across its plated exoskeleton, the multitude of yellow, unblinking eyes that gleamed with intelligence and malice, it was the face of an empire that had enslaved humans for centuries. Icras didn't speak at first. Instead, he studied Kane with a cold intensity. "You are Reaper, yes?" The tone was almost curious. "I've heard the stories." Kane's throat tightened. They knew who he was, and that didn't surprise him. The Craw didn't miss a thing. "You heard wrong," he spat, his voice thick with defiance. "I'm not your plaything." Icras cocked his head, his eyes narrowing. "Oh, I think you'll play quite nicely. You see, you are an example, Reaper. You'll break, just like all the others. No human is stronger than the Craw. No human can defy us for long." Kane's heart beat faster. The anger swelled inside him, but he kept his voice steady. "You'll regret this, I promise you that." Icras chuckled, a low, rasping sound. He motioned for the guards to leave. As they did, he took a step closer. "Tell me, human. Tell me what makes you think you can defy us. You're just one man. One prisoner." Kane didn't flinch. "One human. And that's all I need to turn your world upside down." Icras' mandibles clicked, his patience wearing thin. He had the aura of someone who had seen centuries of conquest, of civilizations broken beneath his boot. But Kane's eyes never wavered. This was far from over. "You see," Icras said, his voice low and almost sadistic, "the problem with humans is that you think you have power. You have nothing. You've always been beneath us. You may kill a few of our soldiers, but in the end, you'll kneel. You'll beg. And we'll break you." The last words sent a jolt through Kane's body. He gritted his teeth. The Craw believed they had the upper hand, that their strength would shatter him. He wasn't some rookie soldier. He was Reaper, the one who had survived every battle thrown his way. Ikras stepped back, gesturing toward the door. Leave him. We'll see how long this Reaper lasts. The door slid shut, and the silence of the cell weighed on Kane. His eyes adjusted to the dim light. He tested his restraints. No way out. Yet. His mind raced. He couldn't afford to waste time. He wasn't just any prisoner, he was a message. A symbol. If the Krau wanted to make an example of him, they would be the ones who'd learn the hard truth about humanity. His team had fallen in that ambush because they underestimated the Krau. That wouldn't happen again. Kane's chest heaved as the realization hit him. He wasn't alone here. There were others. The cells around him were filled with humans, prisoners just like him, but broken, resigned. They had given up. But Kane wasn't done yet. He never gave up. It wasn't in his DNA. They'd taken his squad. They'd taken his people. They wouldn't take him. He would burn the ship to the ground if it meant bringing them all down with him. Listen to me, he said, his voice rasping but strong enough to carry through the silence. I'm not here to die. And neither are you. We're getting out of this. All of us. You just have to follow me. There was a pause, then the soft rustling of voices behind him. A response. A spark. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He wasn't broken yet. Far from it. The Krau would regret underestimating him. Kane closed his eyes, focusing on the only thing that mattered now, survival. And revenge. Kane's wounds burned, his muscles stiff with pain from the constant beatings. The Krau didn't waste time with pleasantries. They worked fast, methodical. Their brutality wasn't personal, it was clinical. As if breaking him was an experiment, not a punishment. His cell had changed, or rather, the conditions within it had. The cold walls had become a familiar presence, but now they felt more like a tomb. The Krau had bound his arms behind his back, chaining him to a chair in the center of the room. The room itself smelled of antiseptic and metal, the air thick and sterile, laced with the tang of alien technology. Ikras visited daily now, each time bringing a new form of torment. It wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The commander understood how to break a human spirit, how to twist and crack their psyche until even the strongest will would crumble. Today was no different. The door slid open with a mechanical hiss, and Kane felt the familiar weight of Ikras' presence before he even saw him. The alien's multiple eyes flickered with cold intelligence, scanning him like a specimen. So, Reaper, still alive? Ikras asked, his voice like the scrape of metal on stone. Kane didn't answer. He had stopped answering Ikras long ago. Words were pointless. Resistance was all that mattered now. Ikras stepped closer, leaning in until his grotesque face was inches from Kane's. His mandibles clicked in a rhythm that made Kane's teeth itch, but he didn't flinch. Not yet. The Krau leader took a moment to study him, his gaze shifting between Kane's bruised body and his unbroken defiance. I've seen men die, you know, Ikras continued, his voice low, almost friendly. You humans, you're fragile things. A well-placed strike, a precise injury, and you're gone. Just like that. But you? You're stubborn. I can see it. You've got the fight in you. I respect that. Kane swallowed, fighting the taste of blood in his mouth. Don't waste your respect, alien, he said, his voice rough but steady. It won't save you when I get out of here. Ikras let out a low, rasping laugh. You'll never leave here. This ship is our prison. The walls are made of pain, human. And we control every inch of it. The door slid open behind him, and two more Krau entered, holding what appeared to be a strange contraption. A machine of sorts, with needles, wires, and what Kane could only assume was designed to torture him in ways he hadn't even imagined yet. Ikras turned to the device, gesturing with a clawed hand. This is the Grillic unit, he said, as though offering a gift. It's designed to tap into your nervous system, stimulate your pain receptors. It's quick, precise, and incredibly effective. Kane's eyes narrowed. He had endured pain before, far worse than anything these aliens could dish out, but the thought of being subjected to something this alien, this invasive, made his stomach churn. He clenched his jaw, forcing his mind to focus. The Krah guards positioned the Grillic unit in front of him, its sleek, metallic surface glinting in the harsh light of the cell. The needles on the device extended, sharp as knives, aimed directly at his skin. His heart rate spiked, but he didn't let his fear show. Ikras stepped forward, watching him closely. I want you to understand something, human. This is not just about breaking you physically. It's about making you see the truth. You are nothing. You will always be nothing. You think you're different because you've fought before. But in the end, you will kneel. You will beg for mercy. Not me, Kane muttered, his voice like a vow. He stared Ikras down, unflinching. You don't know me. Ikras' expression soured, his eyes narrowing. With a flick of his clawed hand, the Grillic unit activated. The sharp needles plunged into Kane's skin, sending a shock of pure agony through his body. For a moment, there was nothing but pain. It was sharp, precise, calculated. The needles targeted every nerve in his body, sending waves of excruciating torment through him. His teeth ground together, but he refused to scream. It felt like an eternity before the device finally powered down. Kane's vision swam, his body trembling with the aftershocks of the pain. But he didn't give Ikras the satisfaction of seeing him weak. His mind remained sharp. He focused on breathing, on keeping his composure. He could endure this. He had to. Ikras stood silent for a moment, watching his captive with a strange expression, almost impressed, yet dismissive. He leaned in again, his face close to Kane's ear. Your body can break. But your mind is what matters. I will break that, too. Kane gritted his teeth, trying to steady his breath. You think I'll break because of a little pain? His voice was hoarse but firm. You're not even close. Ikras paused. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, a hint of recognition. You're different than the others. But you won't last much longer. The Grillic unit is only the beginning. There are other methods. More effective methods. He stepped back, signaling for the guards to remove the machine. As the device powered down, Kane exhaled slowly, trying to calm the tremors in his body. Ikras studied him one last time, his cold eyes locked onto Kane's. You'll see. No matter how strong you think you are, every human has a breaking point. The door slid open again. As Ikras turned to leave, he paused just at the threshold. I'll return tomorrow. And the next day. And the next. Each time, I'll give you a choice. You can die quickly, or you can die slowly. It's up to you. The door slammed shut, and the silence settled back into the room like a heavy cloak. Kane didn't speak for a long time. He focused on the pain, focused on staying awake, staying alert. He had to keep his mind sharp. The physical pain was nothing. It was nothing compared to the agony of losing his resolve. When the guards left, Kane's body sagged in the chair. His blood dripped slowly from the puncture wounds in his skin. But he wasn't broken. Not yet. He couldn't afford to be. The Krah had made a mistake. They had underestimated him. The door to his cell was locked, but that didn't mean it was secure. Kane had survived worse. And this was only the beginning. There was still time. There was always time. The game had just begun. Kane sat in the dim light of his cell, his hands still bound to the chair, though the pain in his body had faded to a dull throb. His mind was elsewhere, calculating, planning. The Krah had made their mistake. They'd assumed their methods would break him, but they didn't know the first thing about human endurance. He had been trained for this, forged in fire, and no matter what they did, he wouldn't bend. The door slid open with its usual mechanical hiss, breaking the silence. Kane didn't look up. The sound had become routine by now, the only consistent thing in his ever-shifting world of pain and torment. Ikras stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 Craw guards. This time, he didn't bring the Grillic unit. Instead, he held a small device in his hand, its glowing lights casting a cold, eerie hue in the otherwise dark cell. "Reaper," Ikras said, his voice a low rasp. "You are a mystery to me. I expected you to break by now. You're a hard creature to understand." Cain lifted his head, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "I'm not your puzzle, Ikras. You're just too stupid to know when to stop." Ikras' mandibles clicked in amusement. He stepped closer, lowering the device onto the table in front of Cain. "This is not a game, human. You will give in. You always do." The device on the table hummed softly, almost imperceptibly. Cain eyed it warily, but he didn't let his expression change. He had to know what it did, but he couldn't afford to show fear. "I'm not like the others you've tortured," Cain said flatly. "You're wasting your time." Ikras' eyes gleamed in the dark. "That's where you're wrong. You're no different from any other. The human spirit is fragile. It doesn't matter how much you've survived before. The mind bends, Reaper. It always bends." Before Cain could respond, the device activated. A sharp, high-pitched sound filled the air, followed by a sudden pressure in his skull, like an invisible weight pressing in on his brain. His eyes widened as his head pulsed with the intensity of the force. The sensation was unlike anything he had experienced, like his very thoughts were being twisted and reshaped. "Do you feel that?" Ikras asked, his voice a low murmur. "This is a mental probe, designed to break your will without leaving a mark. Your mind, your thoughts, everything. I will watch you collapse, piece by piece, until you beg me for mercy." Cain clenched his teeth, fighting to keep control. His breath quickened, but he focused. He had been trained to endure pain, to fight through the distractions, but this? This was different. This was an assault on his mind. He could hear Ikras' voice in the back of his skull, a whisper. "Give in. You're weak. You're nothing. You'll break like all the others." The pressure intensified, the probe cutting deeper. Cain's vision blurred, his thoughts fractured as if they were being torn apart by invisible hands. But through it all, one thought remained: I am not like them. He drew a deep breath and fought back, not with force, but with his resolve. The probe couldn't touch that. It couldn't break the core of who he was. He had seen his comrades fall, each one taken by the horror of war, by the weight of despair. But they had all been human. And humans, when pushed far enough, didn't break. They fought. They survived. "Your mind will fracture, human," Ikras hissed, sensing the resistance. "You cannot hold out forever." Cain's grip tightened around the arms of the chair, his body trembling with the effort to keep his focus. His heart pounded in his chest. He could feel his thoughts slipping, but he held on. He focused on the one thing that kept him tethered to reality, the mission. The reason he was still breathing. "They took my squad. They will pay." As if hearing his thoughts, Ikras' voice echoed again. "You're alone now, Reaper. There's no one coming to save you. The humans you fight for? They've forgotten you. You're just a tool, a weapon to be discarded." Cain fought against the words, pushing them away. He didn't care. He wouldn't care. There was one thing he had learned in battle: you could take everything from a person, but you couldn't take their fight. That was theirs. And the Craw had underestimated that. The device shut off suddenly, and Cain slumped forward, gasping for breath. The pressure in his head was gone, but his mind felt fractured. Still, he gritted his teeth and lifted his head, locking eyes with Ikras. Ikras studied him, his multiple eyes narrowing. "Fascinating," he murmured. "I've never seen such resistance. You should be broken by now." Cain's voice was rough but steady. "I'm still breathing, aren't I?" Ikras' expression darkened, and he turned away. "You're a fool, Reaper. You still think you're the one in control. But you're not. You will submit, one way or another." Cain remained silent, his thoughts spinning. He couldn't fight Icras directly. Not yet. But he didn't need to. Every time the Craw tried to break him, they gave him something new, something useful. And now, he had the beginnings of a plan. The door slid open, and Icras guards returned to drag him back to his cell. Cain resisted the urge to lash out, his mind still reeling from the effects of the device. The guards handled him roughly, but he didn't care. They were nothing more than tools. As the door slammed shut behind him, the silence of his cell settled in again, but this time it was different. Cain wasn't alone anymore. He could feel it. He had spoken to the other prisoners before, quiet words, a glance here and there. They had been broken, their spirits crushed under the weight of their captivity. But Cain saw something in their eyes, something that hadn't yet disappeared. A spark. The Craw had underestimated humans, and that mistake was about to cost them. Cain would ignite that spark. The resistance was brewing, and it wouldn't be long before the Craw learned that the human spirit couldn't be destroyed. Cain leaned back against the cold wall, his resolve hardening. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was waiting. And when the time came, he would strike. Cain had been in the Craw's grasp for weeks now. His body ached from the constant torment, but his mind had become a fortress, hardened by the unrelenting assault on his will. They had tried everything, physical pain, mental probes, even their cruel Grillic unit. But with each new method, Cain only grew stronger. They hadn't broken him. Not yet. And now, he was waiting. Watching. Listening. The cell door slid open again, and 2 Craw guards stepped inside, dragging with them another prisoner. The man was barely conscious, his body limp in their hold. His face was gaunt, eyes sunken from days, or weeks, of starvation. Cain's heart clenched. It wasn't just the Craw's physical brutality that broke people, it was the isolation. The total darkness that surrounded them, the endless hours of silence, the feeling that escape was impossible. The guards dropped the prisoner unceremoniously in the corner and left without a word. Cain's gaze followed them, his eyes narrowing. The door slid shut, locking them both inside once more. The new prisoner stirred slightly, a groan escaping his cracked lips. He was human, which meant he wasn't lost yet. Cain could still help him, or at the very least, he could give him a glimmer of hope. His survival depended on it. Slowly, Cain rose to his feet, his chains rattling softly as he moved toward the man. He kept his voice low, his tone steady, but the words were filled with urgency. "Hey! You alive?" The man's eyes fluttered open, bloodshot and wild, focusing on Cain with confusion. His lips moved, but no sound came out at first. His throat was too raw, too dry. Finally, after a long pause, he croaked, "You're human?" "Yeah," Cain replied, crouching down next to him. "I'm human. And you're not dead yet, so that's a good sign." The prisoner's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, he seemed to focus. "Who are you?" "Cain. Derek Cain. I'm not dead, and neither are you, so we've got a chance." The man blinked, trying to process the words. "A chance? You've seen what they do to us. How much longer can we last?" Cain didn't hesitate. "Longer than they think." His voice was calm, deliberate. "We're not dead yet, which means we can still fight." The man stared at him for a long moment before finally nodding weakly. "You really think we can fight back?" "We're going to have to," Cain replied. "I've been biding my time, waiting for the right moment. And I've learned one thing, these bastards, they might be strong, but they're not invincible. They make mistakes. And when they do, we'll be ready." The prisoner seemed to consider that, his expression softening with a flicker of hope. Cain could see it in his eyes, the first signs of life in him since they had been captured. It was that spark that Cain had been waiting for. Hope. That was the key. "Look around you," Cain said, gesturing to the cold, sterile walls of their cell. "This place is built to keep us down, to make us think we're powerless. But the one thing they didn't account for was human resilience. They don't understand it. and that's going to be their downfall. The prisoner's voice was hoarse, but it held a trace of defiance now. So what's the plan, Kane? How do we escape? Kane paused for a moment, allowing the gravity of the situation to sink in. First, we survive. Second, we wait. I've been watching them, listening to their movements. The Craw are predictable in their own way. They think they have control, but they don't. They're not paying attention to us the way they should. And that's where we'll make our move. The prisoner nodded again, though it was clear he didn't fully understand what Kane was implying. That was fine. Not everyone needed to see the plan yet. As long as the spark of resistance was there, that's what mattered. The rest would fall into place. Hours passed, and Kane went back to his routine, watching, listening, and waiting for his opportunity. He had always been a man of patience. In his previous life, it had been what had kept him alive in combat. And now, it was his greatest weapon against the Craw. It was late in the cycle when the first sign came, a slight change in the guard's routine. Kane had been expecting it. The Craw were good at maintaining control, but they were far from infallible. Every once in a while, their patrols became lax. Just enough to slip through the cracks. Kane's pulse quickened. This was it. His moment. He moved slowly, deliberately, toward the corner where the guard's keycard lay just within reach. He had already noticed it when the guards had dropped off the prisoner, a small mistake, an oversight that would cost them. Kane wasn't going to waste it. With a swift movement, he grabbed the keycard from the floor, concealing it in the palm of his hand. He turned back to the prisoner, who was still watching him warily. "Stay low," Kane whispered. "And when I give the signal, follow my lead." The prisoner's eyes widened, and for a brief moment, Kane saw something else in his gaze, fear. But that was okay. Fear could be used. Fear was a tool, not a weakness. The minutes seemed to stretch on for hours, the anticipation gnawing at Kane's resolve. He held the keycard in his hand, feeling the cold metal edge against his skin, the weight of what it represented heavy in his chest. Then the door slid open. Kane's heart raced, his body tensing in preparation. The two guards entered, their footsteps slow, casual. Kane could hear their gruff voices in the dim light. One of them paused near the corner, turning slightly to check the prisoner. Kane didn't wait for the opportunity to slip away. He lunged forward, shoving the guard aside with all his strength, forcing the man into the wall with a bone-crunching thud. Before the second guard could react, Kane pressed the keycard against the control panel and the door slid open. "Move!" Kane barked at the prisoner, who was already scrambling to his feet. The plan was in motion. There was no turning back now. The prisoner followed Kane closely, his footsteps shaky but determined. They made it through the hallway, past the first few guards, who were caught off guard by the sudden movement. Kane didn't stop. They couldn't afford to waste time. The Craw weren't invincible. They had never understood the true power of human will. They were about to learn just how deadly it could be. Kane's heart pounded in his chest as he led the prisoner through the labyrinthine corridors. This was only the beginning.